with that, I'm going to bring in my next guest. Kevin Freeman is the host of Economic War Room over at The Blaze, and I was just on his show. And so I said, well, one good turn deserves another. So I decided to bring him on here. He's an expert on foreign domestic and foreign economics. Welcome to the program, Kevin.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
Always great to be here.
And you guys should check out Economic War Room over at The Blaze, because it's an amazing program, actually, and what you cover over there. And, we've discovered that we tend to think a lot alike. And I'm not even married to you, which is really fascinating.
No, you've got your own Kevin.
I have my own Kevin.
Yeah.
So I was just talking about this idea that we have to look at stories that we hear through a filter these days. And there's one filter that applies for the mainstream media articles that you see. And there's a second filter that applies for some of the more conservative line articles that you might read. And there's yet another filter for like Fox News and stuff. Like you've got to look at things through a filter, because everybody has an angle. And that's not new, by the way. We were taught in school that reporters are supposed to be neutral, but they've never been neutral. They've just been a little bit more disguised about going about it, right?
Right. No, they can't ever be neutral. Everyone has a worldview, and everything comes down to the worldview. And the reason we have something in common is we both have a biblical worldview. And I appreciate what you and Kevin have put out in media, whether it's your books or your radio show or your television programs or your Hollywood feature films. Everything that you're putting out has a worldview. And a lot of people agree with that worldview, and they need that kind of entertainment and information. So thank you for what you're doing.
So, but tell me, so where do you sit on all of this? Because I've just told the audience that I am optimistic. I think that the coronavirus is overblown, has been overblown by the media, because it serves their agenda. And now that Trump is saying that he wants people to get back to work, that he is desirous that people would be able to go back to work. He hasn't issued a decree, but that he would be desirous of people going back to work by Easter. And by the way, I'm desirous of people going back to work by the week before Easter. Okay. So just to be clear, I think in a week we should be considering who could go back to work. And I know that it'll be, I'm predicting that it'll be sort of piecemeal, a little bit at a time kind of thing. But I think that we should start getting this economy going again sooner rather than later. What's your take on all of that?
Well, it's very complex, but we start in China, and that this is a novel virus, and it can be deadly for those that have certain conditions, certain ages. It hits them wrong, and so forth. So it's something we should take seriously, and we've excessively taken it seriously.
Right.
And I've holed up myself. And I warn my viewers on Blaze, you need to get some stockpiles of food and short term, 2 weeks, a month, so forth. You need to social distance, not shake hands, not cough on people, all of those things. That's real, and it should not be downplayed. Now, having said that, we can't let the cure be worse than the disease.
Right.
And in large part, we're crashing our economy, and now we're talking about $6 trillion of government stimulus to get it restarted. There are second-order effects to this. Even if we get through this, what do we do with that extra $6 trillion? Who's going to buy that debt? There's issues that are associated there. Now, having said that, I share your optimistic view, because I have a Christian worldview, and I believe that God's sovereign and in control. And so I think that I just feel in my spirit that by Palm Sunday, that we're going to get some astounding announcement that we're not expecting. And I don't know if it's going to be that this malaria drug is effective, and it may be. I mean, they're testing it in various places. I don't know if it's that we've got a new test kit where you can test people and see that they have whether or not they have the virus before they start to show symptoms. I don't know any of that. But there is a way American ingenuity, with the grace and help of God, is going to solve this problem, and we're going to get back to work. And I believe it will be much sooner than most people think, even though there will be lingering effects that we have to deal with all the way through it. I would not rush out and throw everything I had into the stock market, because there's an economic problem we're going to have to deal with that's second order. There are all sorts of consequences, but we are going to get through this, and we will get back to work.
Right. And I'm going to go out on a limb. This is going to sound terrible. Should I say this? I'll say it because I'm impulsive. I think maybe years from now we'll look back at this because when we do come back, the economy is going to roar like a rocket ship. I think that when we look back on this, we're going to call it the Great Vacation. I shouldn't have said that. Okay. Walter Williams.
You know, though, for many people, 80, 90, 95, 98, I don't know what the percentage is, but a large majority of people, you know, it's going to be that. But then there's the human tragedy of real people who have suffered because there wasn't a ventilator available.
Right, but there's the human tragedy of the flu, of the influenza every year. There's the human tragedy of tuberculosis, which still claims a number of lives. And car accidents.
Yep.
The human tragedy exists, okay? And so here's what happens. We get caught up in this focus on one thing, and it is the worst thing ever, and therefore everything else goes away, and we only see this worst case scenario. And when we focus on sort of the cure, $6 billion in stimulus spending, and we only see, yay, $6 billion in stimulus spending, it's going to be great. But you've already mentioned that will have ramifications. Walter Williams wrote, some years ago there were calls for mandatory airline infant seats. The FAA's analysis showed that forcing parents traveling with babies to purchase another ticket instead of their infant traveling on their laps would cost an additional $1 billion in airfare expenses on families over 10 years. And because of that higher cost, 20% of families would shift to driving. Because of higher fatality rates associated with driving, the FAA analysis concluded there would be a net increase of 82 infants and adult fatalities over the 10-year period. So here's the question. Where's the trade-off? And that was the thing that President Trump brought up. He's like, the cure should not be worse than the illness. If we shut down our entire economy and it costs us less human life to corona, but costs us millions of untold deaths because people starve to death. And of course, I'm painting a gruesome scenario, but let's just face it. If the economy shuts down, we're impoverished. If the economy shuts down and Pelosi has her way, not only are we immediately impoverished, but then we are shackled to socialism, which won't permit us to even work our way out of the poverty.
No question. Socialism killed 100 million people in the last century. Communism, but socialism leads to communism, according to Lenin. And if we get that kind of authoritarian control like China has used, look, China saved their people. This is the same Chinese people that are organ harvesting from political prisoners and selling the organs. So we need our freedoms, and our freedom is worth some sacrifice, some loss, because it is better for the world to have America as a free state as we have been, a free nation as we've been, than for America to fall into socialism.
Right.
The world would be worse off. You're absolutely right. 100%.
So, and that is what we need to consider. And I just love that. So Walter Williams wrote about this. Thomas Sowell wrote about it. You know, he was in his economics class and he prescribed a certain solution to a problem, and his professor looked at him and said, "Great, and then what?" And so he had to go back to the drawing board and figure out what the consequences of that solution would be, because there are consequences. And he brought them back, the secondary consequences, and his professor looked at him and said, "And then what?" Because, yes, there are tertiary consequences. There's the third tier, right? There's the seen and the unseen. And we have to look at that. And God bless Trump, because I think that he gets it, which is why he said, I was saying this the other day, it bugs me that they say we're shutting down indefinitely. That's a statist. That's somebody with a God complex saying, and then I'm going to come in and rescue everybody when this is all over. Right. After it's all over, I'll come in and right? It's ridiculous. Trump says, I foresee a time when we will be back at work. And I foresee it in the near future, by the way. And then he gets derided for offering, so-called false hope. First, he doesn't offer hope, and then he offers too much hope, and he can't possibly get it right. I think he's going to come out of this smelling like a rose. I think that we're going to come out of this booming. I don't know who's going to pay for the $6 trillion, but I did suggest on Twitter yesterday that it would be the Chinese.
Yeah, I don't know where they'd get it, but sure. There will be a reset for all of this, and that's something that we'll have to face. That's a reality we have to face. There's a reset for all of this, but if we make the wise decisions and keep the American system in place, we can get through this. My current blog is Why Socialism is a Bigger Threat Than COVID-19.
And in fact, I wrote a piece that said that there's already a horrible virus in our schools, and it's not COVID-19, because it's socialism, and it's in our schools. And it's been in there for decades, and no one's doing anything about it much, except expanding it. So I think that we ought to approach life with optimism. And here's the thing. There might be a cure for the illness, but it's not going to prevent you from getting the illness. So the idea that somehow if we hunker down and absolutely annihilate our economy, nobody will get COVID-19 is an untruth. Okay? People will get the disease. The idea of shutting down was to prevent the disease from spiking to the degree that we would not be able to care for the people who get the disease. Well, after 2 weeks of quarantine, you have virtually halted the advancement of the disease. And if you go back to work, but you keep up social distancing, then you can limit the number of people in theory, to a more manageable level, and then the disease will run its course as does influenza every year, as do many other diseases, right? And then you develop this idea of herd immunity, which I talked about the other day. So it bothers me that people look at this as like a zero-sum game, as a very limited, like it's an either or, it's an A or B, a binary proposition. It's not. It's a nuanced thing that needs to be managed, that Trump is managing. And by the way, he started managing this long before the Democrats ever acknowledged that there was an issue. And now, of course, they're saying he didn't do enough early enough when they derided him for doing stuff early on. So, we're managing it. And I have to say, I have a great deal of confidence in him. And by the way, it's not just him. He's assembled an amazing crew of people. Experts.
No, absolutely. This is not a zombie apocalypse, and yet that's the way that most people are treating it. If I get this, I'm completely done for. Most people get through the disease. You're exactly right. We don't want to overtax our health system, so temporary shutdown makes sense. But there will be a time we go back to work, whether it's a week from now or 2 weeks from now or whenever it is, we have to get back to work.
Right. Okay, so what else are you talking about on Economic War Room? Let's talk about your show for a bit.
Well, the next episode that we have, currently we have Dr. Gal Luft, who is an Israeli expert in currencies, and we're talking about the threat to the dollar, especially if you have a $6 trillion stimulus package that puts the dollar at risk. And then the next show after that's a hopeful show, an exciting one with you and Kevin, where we talk about Hollywood as a means of economic warfare. And that's episode 80, and that'll release a week from tomorrow.
What does happen with the $6 trillion? Is it $6 trillion? $6 billion? $6 billion dollar?
Trillion.
It's trillion. I can't even wrap my head around it.
Yeah,
they just print money, right?
Trillion. Well, generally what would happen is you would sell those bonds in the open market. Right now, everybody wants the U.S. dollar because it's a safe haven. They're selling their stocks, they're selling whatever they can, and they're piling up cash, and they want that cash in the form of U.S. dollars. The problem is that that's taking money, sucking it out of the system that we will need to build things to bring companies back and so forth. So eventually, they're going to have to sell that debt somewhere to foreign governments governments or to the American people or to the Federal Reserve. Those are the three places. And if we sell it to the Federal Reserve, that's called monetizing the debt. And it's not technically printing money, but it basically is. It's creating money where there wasn't money before, and that puts a strain on the validity of the currency. And that's an opportunity for China, Russia, and others that have said, hey, the world shouldn't operate on U.S. dollars. We ought to have our own worldwide currency, and we can be part of it. The dollar can be part of it, but it won't be in charge. And the second that happens, we lose dollar hegemony, which means we no longer have the ability to use sanctions and other financial means to hold countries accountable, and we'll lose one of the huge weapons in our economic warfare arsenal.
Interesting. I wish I could sort of wrap my head around that a little bit more. So let's go one step further. So if the federal, so they're not actually printing money, but kind of virtually, it's like a virtual print of money, because what they're doing is they're infusing more money into the system, which then causes inflation. Yes?
Yeah, it causes inflation and potentially massive inflation. If you don't have the reserve currency of the world and you create lots of new money to pay for things, you're Venezuela or you're Zimbabwe or you're Weimar Germany, and your currency collapses and you have a horrible outcome. But we don't have that problem at the moment because we are the reserve currency of the world. When people want to put extra money aside, countries or whatever, they'll put it in gold or they'll put it in the U.S. dollar. And so as that reserve currency exists and people have confidence in it, we're able to, run these massive deficits. We're able to do all the things that we want. The moment people say, I no longer want U.S. dollars, that becomes a problem. And Vladimir Putin and the Chinese and the Iranians and the North Koreans have all said we must de-dollarize the world. And now is a time maybe trying to do that on the heels of a $6 trillion stimulus.
Yeah, but China's going down. Trade with China's going down because China is now persona non grata at the trade table, basically. We're going to be bringing manufacturing back to the United States. We are finally realizing that maybe China shouldn't be manufacturing all of our pharmaceuticals. And if China decides to cut off our ADD meds, I think we're going to go all ADD on them. I don't know.
Yeah. No,
Iran,
you're right. Iran this is economic warfare.
It is. Right. It is. Absolutely. Which is why people need to tune into your program to understand it better than my 2 cents. Iran is going to go through tremendous unrest because the Iranian government has now proven that it's been lying to the Iranian people. Russia's getting ruined because the oil prices have collapsed to such a degree, right?
No, all of that's true. I mean, the whole world is going through this. The problem is whether or not China can convince Germany and other Asian nations and Latin American nations and African nations side with us or side with America, and they have convinced a decent number.
Side with the coronavirus.
Yep.
I'm not making light.
That's a part of our response.
Right.
That's a part of our response. And in fact, there's plans to try and hold China accountable for that. There's lawsuits and so forth. And
$6 trillion worth. Sue them for $6 trillion.
Very complex. People don't know that America is owed money from Chinese. We owe them $1 trillion from U.S. Treasury bonds they own, but they owe us money from pre-Communist Party Chinese bonds that Americans bought that are worth maybe, I don't know, hundreds of billions of dollars, and they owe us that money, and we should try and collect it.
They just legislated it out of existence, basically, right?
Well, they just ignore it, but they can't ignore it totally because when Hong Kong was handed back from the British back to the Chinese, the Chinese admitted the pre-Communist Party debt was valid, and they actually paid the Brits on it. So there is an international precedent for this. That's a future program we'll have on Economic War Room. They owe us money too.
Yeah, but here's the thing: how do you collect a debt from somebody who just says no? I don't care. And that's where President Trump
offset it. You offset it. We owe them $1 trillion. You find a way to offset it.
Isn't that where President Trump has been quite adept at renegotiating our deals with China and using these kinds of pressures?
Again, it's economic warfare. He's actually quite good at it. He's the first president in my lifetime that's recognized China as a threat.
That gets
he
it,
was
yeah.
right. He's certainly not sided with Putin. He actually gets it. And since Reagan, he's doing the best foreign policy that I've seen.
Yeah, and we need to get out of our intimate relationship with China. We need to break up with China. We called it yesterday. We called it conscious uncoupling with China.
We need to love the Chinese people. They're industrious. They're fantastic. But the Communist Party is
right.
who we have as our problem.
That's true. No, that's absolutely true. And it's funny that you have to sort of add this weird racist caveat to when you're talking, because you don't want people to think that you're a racist. And I get it. I just find it so, because racism is so sort of far from my brain, that to think that I should, couch my words to make sure that people don't think that I'm saying all Chinese people are such and such, which is obviously not the case. But I do.
And I wasn't suggesting that at all.
No, I know that.
What I was saying is the communist people are just tremendous economic people. They have historically been fabulous to work with, and we want to work with them. We want to have. It's the Communist Party that's a problem, and the Chinese people need to realize this and get out of the shackles of their master.
Right.
They need to get out from underneath that.
Right.
And as do the Iranians. The Iranian people are good people historically. They need to get out from this horrible regime.
Yes. So the virus is opening up all kinds of pathways that we never, and by the way, not that we would wish this, right? This isn't what we wished, but there are tremendous opportunities that are coming because of this odd situation that we find ourselves in. So Kevin Freeman, where do people find the Economic War Room or find out more information about you?
Well, I started at economicwarroom.com. And when you go to Blaze TV, use the code ECON to get a free trial and discount.
Well, that's fantastic. I want to thank you so much for calling in. It's great speaking with you. And economicwarroom.com for more information. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.